The gunshot echoed through the valley as Faith Newcombe scrambled up the rocky slope, her skirts torn and her hands scraped raw. It was 1875 in the unforgiving Arizona Territory, and she knew what happened to women caught by men like the ones pursuing her. The dust kicked up behind her as she ran, lungs burning in the dry desert air, the distant thunder of hooves growing closer with each passing second. "Keep moving," Faith whispered to herself, clutching the leather satchel that had cost her everything. The documents inside would expose the corrupt land deals that had stolen her family's ranch and gotten her father killed 3 days ago. She stumbled into a narrow pass between two towering rock formations, hoping to lose her pursuers, when she saw him tall and imposing against the setting sun, a stranger atop a chestnut mare. His face was shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out the glint of his eyes tracking her movements. A cowboy, with a rifle resting easily across his lap. Faith froze, trapped between the devil she knew and the one she didn't. "Please," she gasped, her voice barely audible over her ragged breathing. "They're coming." The stranger's gaze shifted to the cloud of dust rising from the trail below. Without a word, he dismounted in one fluid motion and approached, his spurs jangling with each step. Up close, she could see the hard lines of his face, weathered by sun and wind, and eyes the color of a storm brewing over the plains. "Who's after you?" His voice was low, graveled from trail dust and tobacco. Before she could answer, shouts echoed from beyond the pass. Faith's heart hammered against her ribs as she pressed herself against the rock face. "They'll find me," she cried, panic rising in her throat as she heard horses approaching. The cowboy's expression hardened as he stepped in front of her, drawing his revolver with practiced ease. "Then I'll be standing between you and every bullet," he said simply, as though he'd made this kind of promise 100 times before. Faith didn't know why this stranger would risk his life for her, but as 5 riders appeared at the mouth of the pass, she had no choice but to trust him. "That's far enough," the cowboy called out, his stance wide and steady. The lead rider, a thick-necked man with a pockmarked face, drew his horse to a stop and spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground. "This ain't your business, stranger." "The girl's stolen property from Blackstone Mining Company. Step aside." "She doesn't look like property to me," the cowboy replied, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. "And I count 5 of you against 1 woman doesn't seem sporting." The lead rider's eyes narrowed. "I'm Silas Cutter, foreman for Blackstone. That girl has documents that don't belong to her. Last chance to move." Faith clutched her satchel tighter. "They murdered my father," she whispered, just loud enough for the cowboy to hear. "These papers prove they've been forging deeds." Without turning, the cowboy nodded slightly. "Name's Tyler Grayson," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "I'm escorting this lady to the U.S. Marshal in Tucson. You boys want to talk about stolen property, you can do it there." Cutter's hand moved toward his holster. "We ain't going to no Marshal." Tyler's revolver was aimed at Cutter's chest before the man could clear leather. "First man who draws dies. The second man probably does too. How many of you want to risk it?" The standoff stretched like heated glass, ready to shatter at the slightest movement. Faith hardly dared breathe. Finally, Cutter dropped his hand. "This ain't over. Blackstone doesn't forget." He jerked his reins, wheeling his horse around. "Boys, let's go. We'll catch up with them on the trail." The riders retreated, dust billowing in their wake. Only when they were out of sight did Tyler holster his weapon. Faith's legs gave out and she sank to the ground, trembling. "Thank you," she managed, looking up at this stranger who had just saved her life. "But they'll be back with more men." Tyler Grayson crouched beside her, his eyes assessing. "Then we'd best not be here when they return. Can you ride?" Faith nodded, though in truth she hadn't been on a horse in days. "I grew up on a ranch." "Good." He stood and offered his hand. "We'll head northwest away from their likely route, reach Prescott in a couple days if we push hard." Faith hesitated. Prescott, but the nearest Marshal is in Tucson. A ghost of a smile touched Tyler's lips. "I know, that's why Cutter and his boys will be looking for us on the Tucson road." He nodded toward his horse. "She's strong enough to carry double for a while. We'll find you a mount in the next settlement." Faith took his outstretched hand, surprised by the gentleness in his calloused grip as he helped her to her feet. "Why are you helping me?" Tyler checked his ammunition before returning to his horse. Let's just say I've seen what Blackstone Mining does to folks who stand in their way. He mounted up and extended his hand again. We need to move. Questions can wait until we're safe. As Faith settled behind him on the saddle, arms hesitantly encircling his waist, she realized this was the first time in 3 days she'd felt anything resembling hope. The leather satchel remained secure against her body as Tyler guided his horse out of the pass and into the gathering dusk. "Hold tight," he said over his shoulder, and then they were galloping across the open desert, the wind whipping through Faith's hair as they raced the falling night. The first hours of their journey passed in tense silence, both of them scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit. Tyler kept them moving through terrain Faith would have thought impassable in the dark, across dry creek beds, through narrow canyons, and over rocky slopes that made her grip tighten around his solid frame. Only when the moon had climbed high overhead did Tyler finally slow their pace, guiding his mare to a small spring sheltered by twisted juniper trees. "We'll rest here a while," he said, dismounting with fluid grace despite the hours in the saddle. "Horse needs water, so do you." Faith slid down awkwardly, her legs numb and unsteady. Tyler caught her elbow when she stumbled, steadying her without comment before turning to care for his horse. Faith watched him move in the moonlight, efficient and precise, as he removed the saddle and checked the animal's legs. There was something reassuring about his methodical movements, a sense of competence that made her feel safer than she had any right to feel with a man she'd known less than a day. "You've been running for some time," Tyler observed, not looking up from his work. It wasn't a question. Faith sank onto a flat rock by the spring, suddenly aware of every ache in her body. 3 days since they killed my father." The words felt hollow in her mouth, the reality still too sharp to fully grasp. Tyler paused, then continued brushing down his horse. "I'm sorry about your father." "Francis Newcombe," she said, needing to speak his name aloud. "He built our ranch from nothing after the war, Whitewater Creek, about 40 miles east of Phoenix." "I know the area," Tyler said. "Good grazing land." Faith nodded, swallowing past the lump in her throat. "Too good, according to Blackstone Mining. They claimed there was copper under our property. When Father refused to sell, they produced deeds showing they owned half the valley, including our water rights." She patted the satchel at her side. "Father discovered the deeds were forged. He was gathering evidence when her voice broke. Tyler approached, offering a canteen. "Drink," he instructed gently. "Then tell me the rest." The water was cool and sweet, washing away some of the trail dust. Faith took a deep breath. "Father went to confront Stanley Blackstone himself. I was supposed to take the evidence to the marshal if he didn't return by nightfall." Her hands tightened around the canteen. "He came back just before dawn, bleeding from a bullet in his chest. Told me to run, that Blackstone's men would be coming. He died in my arms." She looked up at Tyler, whose face remained impassive in the moonlight. "I grabbed what evidence I could and fled. They've been hunting me ever since." "And now you're determined to reach the marshal," Tyler concluded, taking back the canteen. "Justice is all I have left," Faith said simply. Tyler was silent for a long moment, studying her with those storm-gray eyes. "Get some sleep," he finally said. "I'll keep watch." "Why are you helping me?" Faith asked again. "You don't know me. This isn't your fight." Something flickered across Tyler's face, pain, perhaps, or a memory. "Let's just say I've got my reasons to dislike Blackstone Mining. Rest now. We've got hard riding ahead." Faith wanted to press him further, but exhaustion washed over her in a sudden wave. She curled up on her side, using her arm as a pillow, and was asleep almost instantly. She woke to Tyler gently shaking her shoulder. The eastern sky was just beginning to pale with the first hint of dawn. "Time to move," he said, already saddled and ready. "I've been thinking about your situation. There's a settlement about 15 miles northwest Cottonwood Springs. Small place, but there's a telegraph. We can wire the federal marshal in Prescott from there." Faith stood, wincing as her stiff muscles protested. "And if Blackstone has men there, possible," Tyler acknowledged, "but less likely than the larger towns. Either way, we need supplies and you need a horse." He handed her a strip of dried beef. "Breakfast. Eat while we ride." As the sun climbed higher, the landscape changed from desert scrub to rolling grasslands dotted with ponderosa pines. Tyler kept them moving at a steady pace, occasionally doubling back or taking seemingly random turns tactics to throw off any trackers, Faith realized. "Have you always been a cowboy?" she asked during one of their brief rests, curiosity finally overcoming her caution. A faint smile touched Tyler's lips. "Not always. Spent some time as an Army scout after the war. Before that, I rode with a Texas outfit driving cattle up to Kansas. And now," Tyler adjusted his hat against the sun, "now I do odd jobs. Guide travelers, hunt bounties when they need catching, protect people who need protecting." Faith studied him. There was more to his story. She could sense it in the careful way he chose his words. "You're good at it. Protecting people, I mean." Something like regret flashed in his eyes. "Not good enough sometimes." Before she could respond, he was back on his feet. "We should keep moving. Cottonwood Springs is just beyond that ridge." Cottonwood Springs proved to be little more than a cluster of wooden buildings huddled around a small creek, lined with the trees that gave the settlement its name. A general store, a blacksmith, a small saloon, and a handful of houses made up the entirety of the town. Tyler led them to a weathered hitching post outside the general store. "Wait here," he instructed, dismounting. "I'll see what I can learn." Faith remained on horseback, nervously scanning the quiet street. A woman hanging laundry outside one of the houses paused to stare at her torn dress and disheveled appearance. Two men lounging outside the saloon straightened with interest. Tyler emerged from the store after what seemed like an eternity. "Good news and bad," he said quietly, helping her down. "Telegraph is working, but the operator won't be back until tomorrow morning." Faith's heart sank. "We can't stay here that long. Cutter will have men searching every settlement by now." "Agreed, but I've arranged for horses and supplies." Tyler nodded toward the store. "Mrs. Hudson has a room above the shop where you can clean up and rest. Her husband died last winter, so she's alone there. I told her you're my sister, running from an abusive husband. And she believed you." Tyler's mouth quirked. "She did after I paid her in advance. Go on now. I'll see to the horses and meet you back here in an hour." The storekeeper's widow proved to be a small, bird-like woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She clucked sympathetically at Faith's appearance and led her to a tiny but clean room above the store. "Poor dear, running from that brute," Mrs. Hudson murmured, pouring warm water into a basin. "Your brother explained everything. Don't you worry, I won't tell a soul you're here." Faith felt a pang of guilt at the deception but thanked the woman sincerely. After Mrs. Hudson left, Faith washed away days of trail dust, then changed into the simple calico dress the widow had provided. It was slightly too large but blessedly clean. She was combing the tangles from her hair when a soft knock came at the door. Tyler entered, carrying a bundle of supplies. He stopped short at the sight of her, and something shifted in his expression. Faith realized this was the first time he was seeing her without trail dust and fear etched into every line of her face. "You look." He began, then cleared his throat. "Better. You look better." "Thank you," Faith replied, feeling unexpectedly self-conscious under his gaze. "Did you find horses?" Tyler nodded, setting down his bundle. "Two good mounts waiting at the blacksmith's, and I've been asking subtle questions. No sign of Blackstone men yet, but this town's too small to hide in for long." He lowered his voice. "We'll leave at first light, head straight for Prescott. It's 3 days hard riding, but I know back trails they won't expect us to take." Faith hesitated, twisting the comb in her hands. "Mr. Grayson, Tyler," he corrected. "Tyler," she amended. "I'm grateful for everything you've done, but I can't ask you to risk your life further. Once we leave here, I can make my own way to Prescott." Tyler's jaw tightened. "Those men won't stop hunting you. Blackstone has too much at stake." "This isn't your battle," Faith insisted. "Maybe it should be." Tyler's voice hardened. "Men like Blackstone think they can take whatever they want: land, lives, justice itself. Someone needs to stand against them." Faith studied his face, seeing the conviction there. "You've faced them before," she realized. "That's why you're helping me." "What did they do to you?" Tyler turned away, busying himself with the supplies. "Get some rest," he said, avoiding her question. "I'll keep watch tonight. Tomorrow will be a hard day's ride." Faith wanted to press him, but the set of his shoulders told her he wouldn't welcome it. Instead, she asked, "Where will you sleep?" "I won't," he replied simply. "Not tonight." True to his word, when Faith woke before dawn, she found Tyler sitting in a chair by the window, his revolver resting on his thigh as he stared out at the street below. In the gray half-light, his profile looked carved from stone. "Anything?" she asked softly. Tyler shook his head. "Town's quiet." "Too quiet, maybe." He stood, stretching subtly. "We should move now while it's still dark." They slipped out through the back of the store. The horses Tyler had purchased were waiting at the blacksmith's shed, a sturdy pinto for Faith and a tall black gelding for himself. Both animals were already saddled and loaded with provisions. "Mrs. Hudson packed food for 3 days," Tyler said, helping Faith mount. "Stay close and keep your eyes open." They rode out of Cottonwood Springs as the eastern sky began to lighten, taking a narrow trail that wound up into the pine-covered hills north of town. Tyler set a brisk pace, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Faith matched his movements, grateful for the sturdy pinto beneath her. "You ride well," Tyler observed after they'd put several miles between themselves and the settlement. "I told you I grew up on a ranch," Faith replied. "My father taught me to ride before I could walk." The memory brought a sudden lump to her throat. "He always said a good horse was better protection than any man." Tyler glanced over, a hint of respect in his eyes. "Smart man." "He was," Faith agreed softly. "He believed in working hard and dealing honestly. He thought the law would protect those who did right." Her hands tightened on the reins. "He was wrong about that part. The law is only as good as the men enforcing it," Tyler said. "That's why we need to reach Prescott. Judge Henry Stillwell is there. He's one federal judge Blackstone hasn't managed to buy." They rode in silence for a time, following a stream that cut through a narrow valley. The terrain grew more rugged as they climbed higher into the mountains, the trail sometimes disappearing altogether as they picked their way through boulder fields and dense stands of pine. By midday, they had reached a high ridge overlooking the valley they'd left behind. Tyler drew his horse to a halt, squinting against the sun as he studied the landscape below. "There," he said, pointing to a dust cloud in the distance. "Riders, at least 6 of them, moving fast." Faith's heart quickened. "Headed for Cottonwood Springs?" Tyler nodded grimly. "They're tracking us. Someone must have sent word." He turned his horse away from the ridge. "We need to keep moving. There's an old trapper's cabin about 10 miles ahead. We can rest there briefly, but we'll need to ride through the night." The next hours blurred together for Faith as they pushed their horses to the limits of endurance, following game trails and dry creek beds, sometimes dismounting to lead the animals through particularly treacherous terrain. Tyler remained vigilant, frequently pausing to listen or study the trail behind them. The sun was low on the horizon when they finally reached the trapper's cabin, a crude, half-collapsed structure nestled in a small clearing beside a spring-fed pool. Tyler circled the area warily before allowing Faith to dismount. "Rest here," he instructed, taking the reins of both horses. "I'll see to the animals." Faith was too exhausted to argue. She sank onto a fallen log, muscles aching from the long ride. The leather satchel seemed to grow heavier against her side with each passing mile, the burden of her father's last mission weighing on her more than any physical discomfort. When Tyler returned, he carried a handful of wild berries. "Found these by the spring," he said, offering them to her. "Not much, but they're sweet." Faith accepted them gratefully, the simple kindness touching her unexpectedly. As they shared the berries and strips of dried beef Mrs. Hudson had packed, Faith found herself studying Tyler's face in the fading light. There was a steadiness to him that calmed her despite their circumstances, a quiet certainty in his movements that spoke of a man who knew exactly who he was and what he was capable of. "You never answered my question," she said finally. "About Blackstone, what did they do to you?" Tyler was silent for so long that Faith thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost distant. 2 years ago, I had a small spread near Silver Creek. Nothing fancy, just enough grazing land for a modest herd, a cabin I built with my own hands." His eyes fixed on something in the middle distance. "Blackstone wanted the land for a new mine. When I refused to sell, they didn't bother with forged deeds or legal maneuvers. They just sent men in the night. Faith's breath caught. What happened? I wasn't home, Tyler said, his voice hollow with old grief. I was delivering horses to Fort McDowell. My younger brother Thomas was watching the place. He was just 19, understanding dawned. They killed him, Faith whispered. Tyler nodded once sharply. Burned the cabin with him inside. Made it look like an accident. His hand curled into a fist against his thigh. By the time I got back, Blackstone had already filed claim on the abandoned property. The local sheriff, who was on Blackstone's payroll, ruled it an accident. Case closed. I'm so sorry, Faith said, instinctively reaching for his hand. Tyler stiffened at her touch but didn't pull away. I tried fighting them legally, got nowhere. Then I tried the illegal way. His mouth twisted. Went after one of Blackstone's foremen, nearly got myself hanged. A marshal named Hollister intervened, convinced me that dying wouldn't honor Thomas's memory. So you became a gun for hire instead, Faith concluded softly. I became someone who helps people Blackstone tries to destroy, Tyler corrected. Your father wasn't the first to die standing against them, but maybe with those documents he'll be among the last. Faith squeezed his hand. We'll make sure of it. Something changed between them in that moment, a shift as subtle as a shadow at sunset, but just as real. Faith saw Tyler not merely as her protector, but as a man carrying his own grief, his own mission that now ran parallel to hers. The moment was broken by the distant sound of a branch snapping. Tyler was on his feet instantly, gun drawn. Inside, he whispered urgently, pulling Faith toward the cabin's remains. Someone's coming. The cabin's roof had mostly collapsed, but one corner remained relatively intact. Tyler positioned Faith behind a section of standing wall, then took up position near what had once been the doorway. Stay down, he instructed. If shooting starts, make for the horses. They're behind the cabin, ready to ride. Faith nodded, clutching her satchel tightly as she peered through a gap in the logs. The forest had fallen unnaturally silent, even the birds hushed as if sensing danger. Then she saw him, a man moving silently through the trees, rifle ready. He was dressed in buckskins, his movements those of an experienced hunter. Just one, Faith breathed. Tyler shook his head slightly. Never just one, he murmured. They're trying to flank us. As if summoned by his words, a second figure appeared on the opposite side of the clearing. This one Faith recognized with a jolt of fear Sela's cutter himself, the foreman who had confronted them in the pass. Grayson, Cutter called out, his voice carrying across the clearing. We know you're in there. The girl too. Come out and maybe you walk away from this. Tyler didn't respond, his eyes tracking the movements of the first man who was working his way closer to their position. No need for things to get messy, Cutter continued. Blackstone just wants what belongs to him. The girl can go free once she hands over those papers. Faith's heart pounded so loudly she was certain the men outside must hear it. Tyler caught her eye and shook his head slightly, warning her to remain silent. Last chance, Grayson, Cutter called. Or we burn what's left of this cabin, just like we did to your brother. Something dangerous flashed in Tyler's eyes. Faith saw his trigger finger tense and knew he was seconds away from firing. Wait, she whispered urgently. There could be more of them. Tyler hesitated, then gave a barely perceptible nod. Cutter, he called back, send your men away and we'll talk terms. A harsh laugh answered him. Not how this works, Grayson. You're outnumbered and outgunned. Maybe, Tyler acknowledged, but I've got a clear shot at you from here. You really want to test how fast I am? Tense silence followed. Faith could see Cutter shifting his weight, calculating his options. All right, Grayson, he finally called. Just you and me, man to man, step out where I can see you. Tyler turned to Faith. When I go out there, he whispered, count to 30, then slip out the back. Take both horses and ride northeast. There's a line shack belonging to the Bar T Ranch about 5 miles that way. The foreman's an old friend, Jake Thurmond. Tell him I sent you. I'm not leaving you, Faith protested. Yes, you are, Tyler said firmly. Those documents are more important than either of us. Get them to Judge Stillwell. Before Faith could argue further, Tyler moved toward the doorway. I'm coming out, Cutter. Any man makes a move, you die first. Faith watched in horror as Tyler stepped into the open, his revolver pointed steadily at Cutter. The foreman stood his ground, his own gun aimed at Tyler's chest. "Where's the girl?" Cutter demanded. "Safe," Tyler replied. "And those documents aren't here." "I sent them ahead to Prescott this morning with a friend." Cutter spat on the ground. "You're lying." "Maybe," Tyler shrugged. "Kill me and you'll never know for sure." Faith began counting silently, her eyes fixed on the confrontation. Tyler was buying her time, she realized. He never intended to survive this encounter. At the count of 15, she saw movement in the trees behind Tyler the man in buckskins, raising his rifle. Without thinking, Faith grabbed a fallen piece of timber and hurled it through what remained of the cabin's window. The crash distracted the hidden gunman just long enough. Tyler spun and fired in one fluid motion. The man dropped, his rifle discharging harmlessly into the dirt. Cutter seized the moment to rush Tyler, tackling him to the ground. Faith watched in horror as the two men grappled for control of Tyler's revolver. 23, 24, 25. Faith continued counting, torn between her promise to Tyler and her unwillingness to abandon him. At 28, a gunshot rang out, and both men went still. Faith's heart stopped. Then Tyler rose slowly to his feet, blood staining his shirt. Cutter's blood, she realized with relief. The foreman lay motionless on the ground. "I told you to run," Tyler said hoarsely when he saw her still standing in the doorway. "I started to," Faith replied. "Then I saw the man aiming at your back." Tyler glanced at the fallen gunman, then back at Faith with new respect in his eyes. "We need to move," he said, quickly reloading his revolver. "That shot will bring any others in the area." They retrieved the horses and rode hard through the gathering dusk, following a steep trail that wound further into the mountains. Tyler led them to a narrow canyon where a small creek bubbled over smooth stones. "We'll rest here briefly," he said, dismounting stiffly. "The horses need water, and that wound on your arm needs tending." Faith looked down in surprise at her left arm, where a graze had torn through her sleeve and left a bloody furrow along her skin. In the tension of the moment, she hadn't even felt it. "Must have been a shot I didn't hear," she said, allowing Tyler to help her down from her horse. He led her to the creek and gently cleaned the wound with a dampened kerchief. His touch was surprisingly tender for a man whose hands were calloused from years of hard work. "It's not deep," he assured her, wrapping the injury with a strip of clean cloth from their supplies. "But we should watch for infection." Faith studied his face as he worked, noting the lines of fatigue etched around his eyes. "You saved my life again," she said softly. Tyler's hands stilled for a moment. "You saved mine too," he replied, meeting her gaze. "That man would have shot me in the back if not for your warning." Something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that they were now bound by more than circumstance or parallel goals. Faith felt her heart quicken as Tyler's fingers lingered on her arm, his touch conveying something his words did not. The moment was broken by the distant sound of a horse's whinny. Tyler was instantly alert, his hand moving to his gun. "They're still tracking us," he said grimly. "We need to keep moving." Through the night they rode, following game trails and dry creek beds, sometimes dismounting to lead the horses across particularly treacherous terrain. Tyler pushed them relentlessly forward, even as the moon set and the darkness deepened. Just before dawn, they reached a high alpine meadow ringed by towering pines. In the gray pre-dawn light, Faith could make out a small wooden structure at the far end, the line shack Tyler had mentioned. "We made it," she breathed, exhaustion suddenly washing over her. Tyler nodded, his own weariness evident in the slump of his shoulders. Jake's men used this during summer grazing. Should be supplies inside. The shack proved to be a simple one-room structure with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with benches, and 2 narrow cots. A shelf held basic provisions: coffee, beans, flour, and salt pork. While Tyler tended to the horses, Faith kindled a small fire and set water to boil. The simple domestic act felt strangely poignant after days of desperate flight. Tyler returned as she was stirring coffee grounds into the boiling water. He paused in the doorway, watching her with an unreadable expression. "What is it?" Faith asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing," he said, removing his hat. "Just been a while since I've come in from the trail to find coffee waiting." Something in his tone made Faith's chest tighten. She poured the coffee into 2 tin cups and handed one to Tyler, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "Thank you," he said, and Faith knew he meant more than just the coffee. They sat in companionable silence as the sun rose, casting golden light through the single window. The immediate danger had passed, at least for the moment, leaving them in this strange, peaceful interlude. "How much further to Prescott?" Faith asked finally. "About 30 miles, Tyler replied. "We'll rest here today, travel by night, should reach town by tomorrow morning." He took a long sip of coffee. "Jake Thurmond will be up at the main ranch house, but he keeps this place stocked. His men patrol the range regularly. If Blackstone's trackers come this way, they'll have to deal with Bar T riders." Faith nodded, relief mingling with a curious reluctance. Their journey was nearly over, which meant her time with Tyler would soon end as well. The realization unsettled her more than she expected. "What will you do, after we reach Prescott, I mean?" she asked. Tyler stared into his coffee cup. "Haven't thought that far ahead. You could testify," Faith suggested, "about what happened to your brother." "If we're bringing down Blackstone, your story should be part of it." Tyler's jaw tightened. "Maybe. First we need to get you and those documents safely to the judge." He set down his cup and stood. "You should rest. I'll keep watch." Faith wanted to protest that he needed sleep as well, but exhaustion overwhelmed her. She stretched out on one of the cots and was asleep almost instantly. When she woke, the light had changed. Late afternoon now, golden and warm. Tyler sat by the window, cleaning his revolver with practiced movements. He'd removed his trail coat and vest, and Faith found her gaze lingering on the breadth of his shoulders beneath his cotton shirt. He must have sensed her watching, for he looked up and their eyes met. Something passed between them, quick as a spark and just as potent. "Feel better?" he asked, his voice slightly rougher than usual. Faith nodded, sitting up. "Yes, did you sleep at all?" "Some," he said, though the shadows under his eyes suggested otherwise. He returned to his task, reassembling the revolver with quick, precise movements. "We should eat something before we ride out." Faith rose and moved to the small shelf of provisions. As she reached up, a sharp pain lanced through her injured arm, drawing a small gasp from her lips. Tyler was at her side instantly. "Let me see," he said, gently examining the bandage which had begun to show spots of fresh blood. "Wounds reopened. Sit down, I need to clean it again." Faith obeyed, watching as Tyler gathered water and clean cloth. His movements were efficient but gentle as he unwrapped the bandage and cleaned the wound. "It's not too bad," he assured her, "but we should put some salve on it." He reached into his saddlebag and produced a small tin. "Made from yarrow and pine resin, old Apache remedy." "You learned that as an Army scout?" Faith asked, trying to distract herself from his closeness. Tyler nodded, carefully applying the salve. "Learned a lot from the Apache, how to track, how to hide, how to survive with almost nothing." His fingers moved with surprising delicacy for such a large man. They respect strength, but also wisdom, knowing when to fight and when to vanish like smoke. "Is that what we're doing now, vanishing like smoke?" Tyler glanced up, his gray eyes meeting hers. "For now, tomorrow we fight." He finished wrapping the fresh bandage, his fingers lingering on her skin a moment longer than necessary. "There, should hold." Faith was acutely aware of how close he stood, of the warmth radiating from his body in the cool mountain air. "Tyler," she said softly, "when this is over," a sharp crack outside the cabin silenced her. Tyler's hand was instantly on his gun as he moved to the window, staying carefully to one side. "Rider coming," he said, his voice low and tense. "Just one from the north." Faith joined him at the window, keeping behind his protective stance. Through the glass, she could see a lone horseman approaching across the meadow, a tall figure on a rangy buckskin horse. Tyler's posture relaxed slightly. "It's Jake," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Owner of the Bar T." He moved to the door, opening it as the rider drew near. Jake Thurmond proved to be a weathered man in his 50s, with a silver-streaked beard and keen eyes that missed nothing. He dismounted with the ease of a lifelong horseman and clasped Tyler's extended hand. "Grayson," he greeted. "One of my boys spotted smoke from the chimney. Figured I'd better check who's making themselves at home." His gaze shifted to Faith, assessing but not unkind. Jake, this is Faith Newcombe, Tyler said. We're heading to Prescott, needed a place to rest. Understanding dawned in the rancher's eyes. Newcombe, Francis Newcombe's daughter, Faith nodded, surprised. You knew my father, met him a few times at cattlemen's meetings, Jake confirmed. Good man, heard what happened. His expression darkened. Blackstone's got a lot to answer for. He turned back to Tyler. You've got trouble following you. My men spotted 4 riders asking questions at settlers' cabins about 10 miles south, described a man and woman matching you too. Tyler's jaw tightened. Blackstone's men are persistent. That they are, Jake agreed. Which is why I came to warn you. There's word Blackstone himself is in the territory, staying at the Grand Hotel in Prescott. Faith felt her blood run cold. Stanley Blackstone, the man who had ordered her father's death, was waiting at their destination. Does he know we're heading there? She asked. Jake shook his head. Don't think so, but he's got men watching all the roads into town. He turned to Tyler. There's another way, though. Old mining trail through Granite Dells. Comes out behind the courthouse. Not many know about it. Tyler nodded thoughtfully. We'd need a guide. Got one waiting for you, Jake said with a slight smile. My son Tommy's at our North Line shack. He knows those trails better than anyone. Can take you through tonight, have you in Prescott by dawn. He fixed Tyler with a stern look. No arguments. Consider it payment for that time you saved my cattle from rustlers. Tyler hesitated, then nodded. Thank you, Jake. Don't thank me yet, the rancher replied grimly. Getting to Prescott is one thing. What happens when Blackstone realizes you're there with evidence against him is another. We'll handle that when we come to it, Tyler said, his hand unconsciously moving to his revolver. Jake studied him for a moment, then turned to Faith. Your father stood up for what was right, Miss Newcombe. Not many do these days. The ranchers around here won't forget that. He looked back at Tyler. I'll have Tommy waiting at the North Line shack at nightfall. Pack up and head there as soon as it's dark. After Jake departed, Faith and Tyler prepared for the final leg of their journey in thoughtful silence. The knowledge that Stanley Blackstone himself awaited in Prescott added a new layer of danger to their mission. If Blackstone is there, Faith said as she gathered her few belongings, he must be worried about what these documents could reveal. Tyler nodded, checking his ammunition. Means we're on the right track, but it also means he'll have every gun for hire in the territory looking for us. As darkness fell, they set out for the North Line shack, riding slowly through the dense forest that bordered the meadow. The night was clear and cold, stars blazing overhead in a velvet sky. Beautiful, isn't it? Faith said softly, gazing upward. My father used to say that stars are God's way of reminding us how small our troubles really are. Tyler followed her gaze. Never thought of it that way, he admitted. After a moment, he added, my brother Thomas loved nights like this, used to sit outside our cabin and name the constellations. Faith heard the rare tenderness in his voice. He sounds like he was a good man. The best, Tyler said simply. Better than me, that's certain. He believed in things justice, fairness, like your father. You believe in those things too, Faith said. Otherwise you wouldn't be helping me. Tyler was silent for a long moment. Maybe I'm just looking for revenge. No, Faith said with quiet certainty. If it was just revenge, you would have gone after Blackstone yourself long ago. This is about justice. Tyler glanced at her, something like wonder in his expression. You sound very sure. I am, Faith replied simply. The North Line shack was smaller than the first, little more than a lean-to with a corral attached. Waiting there was Tommy Thurmond, a lanky young man with his father's keen eyes and an easy smile. Mr. Grayson, he greeted them. Pa said you need a guide to Prescott the back way. Tyler dismounted, shaking the young man's hand. Appreciate you doing this, Tommy. Happy to help, Tommy replied, his gaze shifting curiously to Faith. Pa told me what happened to your father, Miss Newcombe. The Blackstone outfit's been pushing folks around too long. They set out immediately, Tommy leading them on a twisting trail that wound through dense pine forest and rocky outcroppings. The young man moved with the confidence of someone who knew every tree and boulder, occasionally pointing out landmarks visible in the starlight. Granite Dells up ahead, he said after several hours of riding. Tricky terrain, but it's the safest approach. Blackstone's men watch all the main roads. The dells proved to be a maze of massive granite boulders, some as tall as buildings, forming narrow passages and hidden valleys. In daylight, Faith imagined, the formations would be breathtaking. By night, they were mysterious and slightly ominous, moonlight casting deep shadows between the towering rocks. Tommy led them unerringly through the labyrinth, occasionally dismounting to guide the horses through particularly narrow passages. Faith lost all sense of direction, trusting completely in their young guide's knowledge. "Almost there," Tommy announced as they emerged from the dells into a narrow ravine. "Prescott's just beyond that ridge. This trail comes out behind the courthouse, like Pa said." The eastern sky was beginning to lighten as they crested the ridge. Below them, Faith could see the town of Prescott spreading out larger than she had imagined, with proper streets and substantial buildings surrounding a central plaza. "The courthouse is there." Tommy pointed to an impressive two-story structure on the far side of the plaza. "Judge Stillwell usually arrives by 8 o'clock. Tyler studied the town below. "Any sign of Blackstone's men?" Tommy shook his head. "Can't tell from here, but they'll likely be watching the main streets." He pointed to a modest building a few blocks from the courthouse. "That's Harvey's boarding house. The widow who runs it is a friend of my mother's. You can wait there until the judge arrives." They descended carefully, staying within the cover of pine trees until they reached the outskirts of town. The streets were mostly empty in the pre-dawn light, though Faith could see the occasional lamp being lit as the town began to wake. Tommy led them through back alleys to a two-story clapboard house with green shutters. A small sign identified it as Harvey's boarding house clean rooms, fair prices. "Wait here," Tommy instructed, dismounting. He disappeared through a back door, returning moments later with a gray-haired woman in a faded house dress. Despite the early hour, she appeared fully alert, her sharp eyes taking in Tyler and Faith with a single glance. "Judith Harvey," she introduced herself briskly. "Tommy tells me you need a place to wait for Judge Stillwell. Come inside, quickly." They followed her through a tidy kitchen into a small parlor at the front of the house. "My other boarders are still asleep, Mrs. Harvey explained in a hushed voice. "You can rest here, I'll bring coffee." When she had gone, Tyler moved to the window, carefully peering out from behind the curtain. "Street's still quiet," he reported. "But that won't last." Tommy shifted uncomfortably. "I should get back to the ranch. Pa will be wondering." Tyler turned from the window, extending his hand to the young man. "Thank you, Tommy. We wouldn't have made it without you." "Just be careful, Mr. Grayson," Tommy replied earnestly. "Blackstone has eyes everywhere in this town." After Tommy departed, Mrs. Harvey returned with coffee and a plate of biscuits. "Judge Stillwell usually arrives at the courthouse by 8, she confirmed. "But getting to him won't be easy. Blackstone's been in town 3 days, staying at the Grand Hotel, has at least 6 men with him." Faith's grip tightened on her coffee cup. "He knows we're coming. He suspects something," Mrs. Harvey agreed. "There's been talk about Francis Newcombe's death. Some aren't accepting the story Blackstone's men have been spreading about it being an accident." Tyler returned to the window. "We need a plan to reach the judge without being seen." Mrs. Harvey considered for a moment. "My son works at the livery behind the courthouse. He could take a message to the judge, ask him to come here." Tyler shook his head. "Too risky. If Blackstone has men watching the judge, they'll follow him." "What about the back entrance?" Faith suggested. "Tommy said the trail comes out behind the courthouse. Could we reach it that way?" "Possibly," Tyler acknowledged. "But the courthouse will be busy once it opens. Too many eyes, Mrs. Harvey set down her coffee cup decisively. "I have an idea. The judge takes lunch at exactly noon each day at the cafe next to his chambers. My niece works there as a waitress. She could deliver a message, bring him through the kitchen to the alley behind. You could meet him there." Tyler considered this, then nodded slowly. "That could work, if we time it right." "I'll send word to my niece," Mrs. Harvey said, rising. "In the meantime, you both look exhausted. I have a spare room upstairs where you can rest for a few hours." The spare room proved to be a small but clean chamber with a single bed, a washstand, and a rocking chair by the window. Faith hesitated in the doorway, suddenly aware of the impropriety of sharing such a space with Tyler. He seemed to read her thoughts. "You take the bed," he said. "I'll keep watch from the chair." Faith wanted to protest that he needed rest too, but the weariness etched into his features stopped her. Instead, she said, "Wake me in a few hours. You need sleep as well." Tyler nodded, though Faith suspected he had no intention of sleeping. As she stretched out on the bed, exhaustion overwhelmed her concerns about propriety. Her last sight before sleep claimed her was Tyler seated by the window, his revolver across his lap and his eyes fixed on the street below. She woke to the sound of church bells. Sunlight streamed through the window, casting warm patterns across the faded quilt. Tyler was still in the chair, though his posture had relaxed slightly. "What time is it?" Faith asked, sitting up. "Just past 10, Tyler replied. "Town's awake now." He gestured toward the window. "Blackstone's men are out there, 2 across the street watching this house, another down at the corner." Faith joined him at the window, careful to stay behind the curtain. Sure enough, she could see 2 men loitering beneath a storefront awning, their attention fixed on Mrs. Harvey's boarding house. "How did they find us?" she wondered. "They haven't necessarily," Tyler said. "They're watching everywhere a stranger might go, but they know we're in town, or at least they suspect we are." A soft knock at the door preceded Mrs. Harvey's entrance. She carried a tray with fresh coffee and a plate of eggs and bacon. "My niece will help," she reported, setting down the tray. "Judge Stillwell takes lunch at noon sharp. She'll bring him through the kitchen to the back alley at 1:15. You can meet him there." She lowered her voice. "But be careful. There are more of Blackstone's men in town today, and they're getting bolder. Stopped my son on his way to work, questioned him about new arrivals." Tyler's expression hardened. "We'll be careful. Thank you for your help, Mrs. Harvey." After the landlady departed, Faith and Tyler shared the simple meal in thoughtful silence. The hours until noon stretched before them, filled with tension and anticipation. "We'll leave separately," Tyler finally said. "You go first with the documents. I'll follow and watch your back. If anything happens to me, you keep going. The judge's chambers are on the east side of the courthouse." Faith shook her head firmly. "We stay together. I'm not leaving you behind." "This isn't about me," Tyler insisted. "Those documents are what matters. They're the only chance to bring Blackstone to justice for your father, for my brother, for everyone else he's hurt." "You matter too," Faith said quietly. Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings neither had dared to voice during their desperate flight. Tyler looked away first. "We should get ready," he said, his voice gruff. "It's nearly time." Mrs. Harvey provided Faith with a shawl and bonnet to help disguise her appearance. For Tyler, she found an old duster and a broad-brimmed hat different from his usual one. "My late husband's," she explained. "It might help you blend in a little better." At 11:30, they slipped out the back door of the boarding house into a narrow alley. Tyler led the way, moving cautiously from one patch of shadow to the next. Faith followed, the leather satchel secured beneath her shawl, her heart pounding with each step. The streets of Prescott were busy with midday traffic wagons rumbling past, townspeople going about their business, cowboys and miners mingling on the boardwalks. Faith kept her head down, staying close to Tyler as they made their way through back streets toward the courthouse. They were a block away when Tyler suddenly pulled Faith into a recessed doorway. "Blackstone," he whispered, nodding toward the street. Faith peered carefully around the edge of the doorway. Across the plaza, emerging from the Grand Hotel, was a tall, distinguished-looking man with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His expensive suit and confident bearing marked him immediately as a man of wealth and influence. Stanley Blackstone, the man responsible for her father's death. Rage and grief surged through Faith so powerfully that she might have stepped into the street if not for Tyler's restraining hand on her arm. "Not now," he murmured. "That's not why we're here." Faith forced herself to breathe, to remember their purpose. "You're right," she said, though her voice shook. "Justice, not revenge." They watched as Blackstone crossed the plaza, flanked by 2 hard-faced men who were clearly armed despite their city clothes. He entered the courthouse through the main entrance, his bearing that of a man who expected deference from all he encountered. "He's meeting with the judge," Faith realized with alarm. "What if he's trying to stop us?" "Then we need to hurry," Tyler said grimly. He checked his pocket watch. "It's nearly noon. Let's get to the cafe." They circled around to the back of the courthouse, where a small cafe occupied the corner of the next building. A narrow alley separated the two structures, providing access to the cafe's kitchen entrance. "This is where we're supposed to meet the judge," Tyler confirmed, surveying the alley. "Looks clear for now, but stay alert." They positioned themselves in the shadows beside a stack of empty crates, watching as the courthouse clock struck 12. Minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. Faith clutched the satchel tighter, her palms damp with nervous perspiration. At 12:15 exactly, the cafe's back door opened. A young woman in a waitress uniform peered out, then beckoned urgently. "Quickly," she whispered as they approached. "The judge is waiting." She led them through a busy kitchen, where cooks barely glanced up from their work, and into a small private dining room. There, a tall, austere man with a shock of white hair and piercing blue eyes rose from his seat. "Judge Stillwell," the waitress announced, then quietly withdrew, closing the door behind her. The judge studied them with a measuring gaze. "You're the ones Betty told me about," he said. "Something about evidence against Stanley Blackstone." Faith stepped forward, removing the satchel from beneath her shawl. "My name is Faith Newcombe. This evidence belonged to my father, Francis Newcombe. He was murdered for collecting it." Judge Stillwell's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes at the mention of her father's name. "I knew Francis slightly," he acknowledged. "A honest man by all accounts." He gestured to the chairs across from him. "Sit, show me what you have." For the next 20 minutes, Faith laid out the documents her father had gathered: forged deeds, falsified mining claims, evidence of bribes paid to local officials, and most damning of all, letters between Blackstone and his foreman discussing the removal of uncooperative landowners. The judge examined each paper carefully, his frown deepening as the evidence mounted. When he looked up, his eyes were cold with anger. "This is more than enough for an indictment," he said. "Fraud, corruption, conspiracy, and if what you say about your father's death is true, murder as well." "It's true," Tyler spoke up. "Blackstone did the same to my brother 2 years ago, burned our ranch with him inside when I wouldn't sell." Judge Stillwell studied Tyler with new interest. "And you are Tyler Grayson," he replied. "I've been helping Miss Newcombe reach you safely." The judge nodded slowly. "Blackstone has powerful friends, even in the territorial capital. Moving against him won't be simple." He gathered the documents carefully. "I'll need to secure these immediately and send telegrams to the federal marshal's office." "Blackstone is in town," Faith warned. "We saw him entering the courthouse earlier." "Yes, he's been pressuring the county recorder about some mining claims," Judge Stillwell said with distaste. "But he'll be gone soon enough. I have the authority to issue arrest warrants based on this evidence." "How soon?" Tyler asked, his hand unconsciously moving to his gun. "I can have the warrants by this evening," the judge replied, "but executing them may take longer. Blackstone rarely travels without armed guards." A knock at the door interrupted them. The waitress entered, her face pale. "Judge," she whispered urgently, "there are men asking questions in the cafe. They're describing these two." Tyler was on his feet instantly. "We need to go," he said to Faith. Now, Judge Stillwell rose as well. "There's a passage through the cellar," he said. "It connects to the courthouse basement. Used during Apache raids years ago. Betty will show you." "The documents," Faith began, "are safer with me," the judge assured her. "I'll secure them in my chamber's safe, but you two need to find somewhere to hide until the marshals arrive." The waitress led them to a trapdoor behind the pantry shelves. "Follow the tunnel straight through," she instructed. "It comes out in the courthouse basement. From there, take the back stairs to the first floor. There's an exit on the east side that's rarely used." Tyler thanked her, then turned to Faith. "Ready?" she nodded, though her heart was racing. The tunnel was low and narrow, forcing them to crouch as they made their way through the damp darkness. It smelled of earth and old timber, the air close and stale. After what seemed an eternity, they reached a second trapdoor. Tyler pushed it open cautiously, revealing the dimly lit courthouse basement. They emerged into a room filled with file cabinets and storage crates, thankfully empty of people. "This way," Tyler whispered, leading her toward a narrow staircase. They ascended quietly, pausing at the top to listen for any movement. The corridor was empty, late afternoon sunlight slanting through tall windows. Tyler oriented himself, then nodded toward a door at the far end. That should be the east exit. They had nearly reached it when a voice behind them called out, "Hold it right there." Tyler spun, pushing Faith behind him as he faced Sela's Cutter and two other men, all with guns drawn. "Well, well," Cutter said with a cold smile. "Looks like our chase is finally over," he gestured with his revolver. "Where are the documents, Miss Newcombe?" "Safe with Judge Stillwell," Faith replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "It's over, Cutter. The judge has seen the evidence." Cutter's smile didn't waver. "Then I guess we'll need to make sure you don't testify about how you obtained it." He shifted his aim to Tyler. "Starting with your protector here." "I wouldn't do that," came a new voice from behind them. Stanley Blackstone himself stepped into the corridor, flanked by two more armed men. "At least not here in the courthouse. Too messy." Blackstone was even more imposing up close, tall and aristocratic, with cold eyes that regarded Faith and Tyler with the dispassionate interest of a man examining insects. "Miss Newcombe," he said smoothly, "your father was equally stubborn." "A shame you inherited that trait." Faith felt rage surge through her. "You murdered him," she said, her voice shaking. "And Tyler's brother, and how many others?" Blackstone shrugged elegantly. "Progress always has its costs. The copper beneath your ranch will help build this nation's future." "Your father was simply too short-sighted to see that. And too honest to accept your bribes," Faith retorted. A flash of anger crossed Blackstone's carefully composed features. "Honesty is a luxury for those who lack ambition," he said coldly. He turned to his men. "Take them out the back. Make it look like they were robbed. Two drifters who met an unfortunate end." Tyler's hand moved to his gun, but Cutter was faster, striking him across the temple with his revolver butt. Tyler stumbled, blood streaming from the wound. "Tyler." Faith cried out, trying to reach him, but one of Blackstone's men grabbed her arms. "Take them to the wagon," Blackstone ordered. "Quickly, before anyone comes." Faith struggled against her captor as they were forced down a service corridor toward a loading area at the rear of the courthouse. Tyler was half-conscious, supported between two men. The loading area was deserted, a covered wagon waiting with its team hitched and ready. Faith knew with sickening certainty that if they were taken in that wagon, no one would ever see them alive again. As they approached the wagon, a shot rang out, echoing off the courthouse walls. One of Blackstone's men cried out, clutching his shoulder as he fell. "Let them go, Blackstone," Judge Stillwell's voice commanded. He stood at the corner of the building, a shotgun leveled at the group. Behind him were two men with deputy badges gleaming on their vests, Blackstone's face contorted with rage. "This is a mistake, Stillwell. I have friends in the Capitol who will disavow you once they see this evidence," the judge cut in. "Deputies, arrest these men." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion to Faith. Cutter, seeing his plans collapsing, raised his gun toward the judge. Tyler, regaining his senses, lunged forward, tackling the foreman. The gun discharged, the bullets striking the wagon harmlessly. The courtyard erupted into chaos. Blackstone's men scattered, some surrendering, others attempting to flee. In the confusion, Blackstone himself broke free, running toward a side alley. "He's getting away," Faith cried, pointing. Tyler was already in pursuit, his longer strides quickly closing the distance. He tackled Blackstone just as the man reached the alley entrance, both of them tumbling to the ground. Blackstone was surprisingly strong for a man who appeared so refined. He struck Tyler with a vicious blow to his injured temple, then scrambled for a small derringer hidden in his vest. Faith, running after them, saw the tiny gun emerge. Without thinking, she grabbed a loose paving stone and hurled it with all her strength. It struck Blackstone's arm, sending the derringer skittering across the cobblestones. Tyler seized the advantage, pinning Blackstone to the ground as deputies rushed to secure him. The mining magnate's elegant facade had crumbled, revealing the ruthless killer beneath as he spat curses and threats. "It's over," Tyler said, rising to his feet as the deputies handcuffed Blackstone. Blood still trickled from his temple wound, but his eyes were clear and focused as they found Faith's. Judge Stillwell approached, the shotgun now lowered. "You two have shown remarkable courage," he said, genuine respect in his voice. With your testimonies and these documents, Blackstone will stand trial for fraud, corruption, and murder. His empire won't survive this." Faith felt a wave of emotion wash over her grief for her father, relief that his killer would face justice, and something else as she looked at Tyler, something she wasn't quite ready to name. "What happens now?" she asked, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was, how far they had come. "Now," the judge said kindly, "you rest. My wife and I have a guest room where you'll be safe until the federal marshals arrive. There will be time enough for statements and testimony tomorrow." As Blackstone and his men were led away, Faith found herself standing alone with Tyler in the aftermath of the chaos. His face was streaked with blood and dust, his expression unreadable as he watched Blackstone being taken into custody. "It's done," Faith said softly, touching his arm. "For your brother, for my father." Tyler looked down at her, something shifting in his storm-gray eyes. "Not quite done," he said. "There's still your ranch. Without Blackstone's interference, you should be able to reclaim it." Faith hadn't thought that far ahead. The ranch, her home, her father's legacy. "Yes," she said slowly. "I suppose I should go back, try to rebuild. It won't be easy," Tyler warned, "running a ranch alone." "No," Faith agreed. She hesitated, then added, "I don't suppose you know anyone who might be looking for work." "Someone good with horses, maybe. Someone who stands between trouble and those who need protecting." A smile, the first real smile she had seen from him, transformed Tyler's face. "I might know someone," he said softly. "Someone who's been thinking he's been alone on the trail too long." Faith felt her heart quicken. Would this person consider a partnership? In the ranch, I mean. Tyler's hand found hers, his calloused fingers entwining with her smaller ones. "I think he might consider more than that if given time." The connection between them, forged through danger and desperation, strengthened in that moment of peace. Faith knew there would be challenges ahead, rebuilding the ranch, testifying against Blackstone, healing from all they had lost. But for the first time since her father's death, she felt hope for the future. "Time," she repeated, squeezing his hand. "We have that now." 3 months later, Faith stood on the porch of the rebuilt ranch house at Whitewater Creek, watching as Tyler worked with a young colt in the corral. The autumn sunlight caught in his hair, now longer than when they'd first met, and gleamed off the new sign hanging over the ranch gates. Newcombe and Grayson, Whitewater Creek Ranch. The trial of Stanley Blackstone had concluded the previous week with a verdict that sent shockwaves through the territory. The mining magnate had been sentenced to hang for the murders of Francis Newcombe, Thomas Grayson, and 2 other ranchers who had opposed his land grabs. His empire was being dismantled, his corrupt officials exposed and removed from office. Judge Stillwell had kept his promise, ensuring that Faith regained full ownership of her family's ranch. The neighboring properties, similarly stolen through Blackstone's schemes, were being returned to their rightful owners or their heirs. Tyler had stayed true to his word as well. He had helped Faith rebuild, using his connections with Jake Thurmond and other honest ranchers to re-establish the Newcombe herd. Together, they had repaired fences, restored water rights, and slowly breathed new life into the land Francis Newcombe had loved. And somewhere along the way, as they worked side by side through long days and shared quiet evenings on the porch, their partnership had deepened into something more. Tyler's nightmares about his brother's death grew less frequent. Faith found herself laughing again, the weight of grief gradually lightening without ever fully disappearing. Tyler looked up from his work with the colt, catching sight of Faith on the porch. He smiled, something he did more easily these days, and led the young horse back to the stable before crossing the yard toward her. "Mail come?" he asked, climbing the porch steps. Faith nodded, handing him a letter. "From Jake Thurmond. Says Tommy's getting married in the spring. We're invited." Tyler read the letter, his smile widening. "Good for him. That Peters girl, I imagine." "Sarah, yes," Faith confirmed. "And there's news from Prescott, too. Judge Stillwell writes that they've appointed a new mining commissioner, someone honest who'll enforce the new regulations." Tyler set the letters aside, his expression growing serious. "I've been thinking," he said, taking her hands in his, "about the future, this partnership we have." Faith's heart quickened. Over the past months, their relationship had grown in quiet moments, a touch of hands as they passed tools, evenings reading together by the fire, a first tentative kiss beneath the stars after a long day's work. They hadn't spoken of permanence, both still healing from their losses, both cautious about the fragile happiness they had found. "What about our partnership?" she asked softly. Tyler's hands tightened on hers. "I'm thinking it should be more official." From his pocket, he withdrew a small circle of gold, a simple band that caught the afternoon light. "My mother's," he explained. "The only thing I saved from the fire." Faith felt tears spring to her eyes as Tyler continued, his voice rougher than usual. "I know I'm not much, just a cowboy with more scars than prospects, but I promise you this, as long as I live, I'll stand between you and whatever troubles come. I love you, Faith Newcombe. Will you marry me?" Faith looked into those storm-gray eyes that had once frightened her with their intensity and now felt like home. "You're everything," she whispered, touching his weathered cheek. "And yes, Tyler Grayson, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Faith remembered their first meeting, her desperate flight, his unwavering protection. "They'll find me," she had cried, and his response had been immediate and absolute. "Then I'll be standing between you and every bullet." He had kept that promise, and now they were making new ones that would last a lifetime. Their wedding took place the following spring, with Judge Stillwell officiating and the Thurmans, Mrs. Harvey, and ranchers from across the territory in attendance. The ceremony was held beneath the cottonwood trees along the creek that gave the ranch its name, wildflowers carpeting the ground where once there had been only dust and fear. Faith wore her mother's dress, carefully preserved through the years, and carried a bouquet of desert blooms. Tyler, unaccustomed to formal clothes, nevertheless looked handsome in a new black suit, his hair trimmed and his face cleanly shaven for the occasion. "Never thought I'd see this day," Jake Thurmond remarked as he shook Tyler's hand after the ceremony. "You standing still long enough for a woman to catch you." Tyler's eyes found Faith across the gathering. "Wasn't about being caught," he said quietly. "Was about finding where I belong." The celebration continued well into the evening, with music and dancing beneath lanterns strung from the trees. As the moon rose, Tyler led Faith away from the festivities to a quiet spot beside the creek. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. Faith leaned against him, content in a way she had never imagined possible in those dark days after her father's death. "More than I thought I could be," she admitted. "Though I still miss him, wish he could have been here." "He would be proud of you," Tyler said. "Of what you've done with the ranch, of how you stood up to Blackstone, that takes courage." Faith smiled up at him. "Speaking of the ranch, I have news. Judge Stillwell sent word that the Territorial Land Office has approved our application. The southeast pasture that was in dispute, it's officially ours now." "That's good land," Tyler nodded approvingly. "Good water, too. We can increase the herd by at least 50 head. "My thoughts exactly," Faith agreed. "And maybe in a few years we might need the extra income." Tyler looked at her questioningly. Faith took his hand and placed it gently against her still flat stomach. "For our family," she said softly. Understanding dawned in Tyler's eyes, followed by a joy so profound it transformed his features. "A baby," he whispered, his voice catching. "You're certain?" Faith nodded, her own happiness reflected in his expression. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday. Come winter, there will be 3 of us at Whitewater Creek." Tyler gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I never thought I'd have this," he confessed against her hair. "After Thomas died, I figured I'd just drift until some faster gun found me. Then you came running up that pass and everything changed." Faith leaned back to look into his eyes. "For me too," she said. "You saved me that day in more ways than one." "We saved each other," Tyler corrected, his hand still resting protectively over their unborn child. As they stood together in the moonlight, the sounds of celebration drifting on the evening breeze, Faith thought about the journey that had brought them here, from a desperate encounter between strangers to this moment of shared hope and promise. The ranch was flourishing, justice had been served, and the future stretched before them like the vast Arizona sky, full of possibility and bright with stars that no longer seemed distant and cold. but rather shone with the warmth of home. Tyler bent to kiss her, gentle and reverent, and Faith knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The cowboy who had once promised to stand between her and every bullet would stand beside her through all the days to come, not just as protector, but as partner, husband, and father to their children. And that, Faith thought as she returned his kiss beneath the cottonwood trees, was a future worth fighting for.